Well, hello and welcome to part 3 in my series on how I created my fabric scroll, the landscape, the long, very landscape scroll I've been stitching over the last couple of months, and I'm getting pretty close to finish now. And thank you to all of the people who have been watching these videos. It's been really exciting to me to see how many people have been interested in seeing what I've been doing. And I hope that continues. And what am I wearing today? I am wearing a shawl that I knitted a couple of years ago from some of the very large stash of yarn that I have in my house. Some of it has been around since before my adult children were born, so definitely time to be used. I call this my February knitting shawl because I knit this every day in February a couple of years ago. And I'm planning another February knitting project for the coming year. Not quite as ambitious as this one, but hopefully I'll finish it within a month. Anyway, let's get on with today's stitch. Today I'd like to talk to you about chain stitch. And first I'd like to show you really clearly using really thick yarn what chain stitch looks like. So the way that chain stitch works is you come up on the front of the fabric. Now your needle is going to go back very close to where your needle came out. And you'll notice then that your yarn makes kind of a loop. And then when you take your first stitch and come back out, you want your needle to be inside that loop. So for the next stitch, you will do the same thing. Wherever your needle came out, you will go back into the same hole and then take your stitch and then come up inside the loop that the thread forms. And you just keep going, and you can go for as long as you want it. And then when you're ready, when you've finished your very last one, you don't take another loop because that could just keep going on into infinity. You just take a small stitch and that secures the last loop. And that holds the last loop in place. So let me show you how I use that on my cloth here. I didn't use a lot of continuous chain stitch, but I did make a few sections of plant stems using chain stitch, and that's exactly what I've done here. I've continued with the continuous chain stitch, and these stems are varying lengths. I don't want them to all be the same length, so I'm moving them around in this area just kind of randomly. I'm not really planning it. I'm not really worried about how many I do, but I am keeping in mind the different stitches that I want to show you, so I'm making sure that I don't use up all the space and I leave space for the stitches that I still want to show you. And my daughter, one of my daughters mentioned that it's odd watching me stitch with my left hand. And I said to her, well, welcome to my world. That's how I feel most of the time watching people doing things with their right hand. And I have to mentally flip it to the other way around. So as I mentioned before, chain stitch comes in two versions. There's a continuous version that I just showed you. And there's also what's called a detached chain stitch. Now this is just a single isolated solitary chain stitch that doesn't continue on, and you make it exactly the same way. You get started exactly the same way as the continuous chain stitch. You secure that chain just the way that I showed you with the continuous chain stitch. You just take a small stitch at the end there. You can also finish off your loop with a long stem, so let me show you how to do that. Instead of taking a short stitch that just leaves a little leaf-like shape, if you take a long stitch to secure that loop, that can be really interesting, and it creates almost like a stem on your leaf if you like. So I'm going to use both versions on my piece here and add some leaves to this lonely little bare tree that I have here. And now you can do these in both directions. You can start your stitch right by the branch if you want, or if you're using the long arm chain stitch, you can start it further away and then attach the leaf to the branch with the long chain stitch. And I'm going to spend some time adding lots of stitches here, and you can see, even though I've sped up this video, this is definitely not a fast process. It takes time to build up lots of leaves on my plant here. And I can also use this chain stitch to create petals for flowers. And in this section, I'm going to make some petals for the chain stitch stems that I made earlier. And I'm just adding them on randomly. I don't know what kind of flowers these are. They're fantasy imaginary flowers with just some little pink petals at the top. So again, the petals can be added with the long arm at the end or with the short stem. Now I've this little tree is still bothering me. I feel like it needs to have a little bit more presence. It's small. It seems smaller than the plants. It should be at least a little bit bigger. So I found some cloth that matches the piece of cotton that I used to start off this tree, and I'm going to add this onto the top using, again, chain stitches. I showed you how I've used other stitches to attach bits of cloth. Now I'm showing you how you can use chain stitches, so I don't have to put a layer of running stitch or straight stitch. I can just go into this chain stitch that look like leaves, and that is decorative and functional. It's attaching this bit of cloth to my background, and it's also adding leaf shape. And I've chosen orange thread this time so that my stitches again show up. If I'm going to put the time into making these stitches, I really want them to be visible and for them to be noticed. I don't want the cloth, which somebody else created, to be the focal point of my design here. I want my work, my stitches, to be the thing that people look at. Now, when you're looking at this, you might be thinking, oh, there's that really hard line where the edge of the cloth meets the other piece of cloth, and it's not exactly what I want it to look like, but I'm not going to worry about this now because I know from experience that the more stitches I add here, the less obvious that hard line is going to be. And one of the things that I find with my students sometimes is that they give up too soon. They look at it and they go, oh, that doesn't look perfect. I've got to change it. I've got to take it out and do something else. Well, as a maximalist, I know that if I add more, those things you won't notice those things. You can see them now, but the more stitches I add, the less obvious that will be. So I'm going to trust the process and believe that I can add more stitches that will make that hard line less obvious. Oh, and there you go. Good habit. I'm leaving my needle tucked into the cloth. And now, if you've been paying close attention, you may have noticed that some pink flowers have appeared on the green grass there. It's another version of the detached chain stitch. It's actually called the lazy daisy stitch because it looks a lot like daisies. Essentially, all you do is you make a series of detached chain stitches going around in a circle. They all start in the same place, and then they fan out around in a circle. And for my very organic, imprecise, natural-looking landscape that I have going here, it does not have to be a perfect circle. Your stitches do not all have to be the same size. They don't all have to fan out with regular spacing. Just go around in a circle-ish shape. Ish is a concept that I use a lot in my art. They do not have to be exact. If some of the threads are a little bit loopy, don't worry about it at all. Once you've got thousands and thousands of threads on here, no one will notice that there are a few threads that may be not precisely placed. And if they do, I wonder why they would choose to look at those threads rather than the thousands and thousands of beautiful threads or the overall composition. There's a phrase that I hear people say, I need to fix this because if I don't, every time I look at this, I will see that mistake. Well, what is a mistake? If we do things that are unexpected, we can often learn things and discover new things. Nobody discovered anything new by doing exactly what they'd done before or exactly what they were told. New things are discovered when we try things and allow ourselves the freedom to make mistakes that can become new ways of doing things. I would encourage you to not focus on individual stitches. Look at the overall composition and the beauty that you've created when you look at the whole thing, and stop worrying about mistakes. And there you go. There are my three lazy daisy flowers that I've made. And now let me show you the other places that I've used the chain stitch in my composition. There's some more little daisies, white ones with yellow centers. In my next video will show you how to do the centers. There's a few there. I even used the stem stitch to create those little ants. Oh, and I used it to make water droplets. Really versatile, interesting stitch there that you can use in all kinds of ways. So my next video will be on French knots, and if you've been practicing that wrapped knot for your thread that I showed in the first video, then you'll be well set for making French knots. If not, go practice making this style of knot, because that's exactly the same way that we're going to make the next stitch. So thanks for watching so far, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.